A mother's embrace is meant to protect, not destroy. Yet history shows us that sometimes that sacred bond is twisted into its darkest inversion. We have seen mothers stand before cameras, their cheeks wet with tears, their voices cracking with desperation, begging for their children's safe return, while secretly hiding a truth more horrifying than anyone dared to imagine. These betrayals cut deeper than any crime committed by a stranger because they violate the most sacred trust, the bond between parent and child. Today, Dark Side Secrets begins a chilling series on maternal evil with one of America's most infamous cases. This is the story of Susan Smith, the young mother who convinced a nation to grieve with her before revealing a nightmare no one wanted to believe. If this story grips you, please like, share, and subscribe so we can continue bringing more true crime investigations to the channel. On the night of October 25, 1994, the small town of Union, South Carolina, settled into a quiet Tuesday evening. Families gathered around dinner tables, children finished their homework, and neighbors waved across lawns, unaware that their community was about to become the center of a national tragedy. Just a few hours later, 23-year-old Susan Smith stood before live television cameras, her body trembling as tears streamed down her face. She pleaded for the safe return of her 2 young sons. Her words painted a terrifying picture. At a red light, she said, a black man forced his way in her car at gunpoint, pushed her out, and sped off into the night with her children still strapped in their seats. According to Susan's frantic story, 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex were helpless in the back seat when a stranger disappeared into the darkness. Within minutes, the news spread across the state, then the country. Parents everywhere felt their stomachs drop. Law enforcement agencies launched into action. Roadblocks went up across Union County. Helicopters swept through the skies, their searchlights cutting across fields and woods. Volunteers, some who had never met the Smith family, combed through highways, ditches, and back roads. Television networks broadcast the boys' smiling faces again and again, while prayer for their safety echoed in living rooms far beyond South Carolina. The wave of sympathy only grew as Susan and her estranged husband, David, appeared together before the cameras. Despite their broken marriage, they presented a united front in grief, voices cracking as they begged for the safe return of their children. Candlelight vigils began to appear across Union. Yellow ribbons were tied around trees, a symbol of hope. Churches filled with parishioners whispering prayers. For 9 days, the entire nation believed it was witnessing the raw pain of a young mother whose world had been shattered. But behind those public tears, detectives were growing uneasy. From the beginning, Susan's description of the carjacker was oddly vague, missing the kind of detail one would expect from someone who had looked into the eyes of her children's abductor. Her timeline of events shifted with each retelling, creating contradictions investigators couldn't ignore. While she wept convincingly on camera, behind closed doors, she seemed strangely detached, her emotions flickering on and off like a performance. Polygraph tests only deepened suspicion. Detectives began to ask themselves the question no one wanted to say aloud. What if the grieving mother was lying? The investigation soon turned away from the phantom carjacker and towards Susan's private life. Detectives discovered her relationship with Tom Findley, the wealthy son of a local businessman. Tom had recently ended the affair, leaving behind a letter that struck investigators as chilling. In it, he told Susan he cared for her, but he made his feelings clear. He was not ready to be a father, and he wanted no part in raising her children. For Susan, who was infatuated and desperate to hold on to him, the letter was devastating. Friends would later testify that she was obsessed with Tom, clinging to the hope of a future together. In her mind, her sons were no longer the center of her life. They were obstacles, barriers between her and the man she thought could give her happiness. On November 3rd, 9 long days after the supposed abduction, Sheriff Howard Wells sat across from Susan in the interrogation room. He looked her in the eye and said calmly, "We know there was no carjacker." The words hit like a hammer. The facade crumbled. Susan broke down and confessed to a crime so shocking that even seasoned detectives struggled to comprehend it. She described how, on that October night, she had driven her Mazda to John D. Long Lake with Michael and Alex buckled securely in the back seat. She pulled onto the boat ramp, stepped out of the car, released the handbrake, and stood silently as the vehicle rolled forward into the dark, cold water. She did nothing as the car drifted away from the shore, her children's cries muffled behind the glass. She watched as the headlights disappeared beneath the surface, leaving only ripples in the black water. There had been no kidnapping, no gunman, only a calculated act of betrayal committed by their own mother. When divers finally pulled the Mazda from the lake, the scene was unbearable. Inside the murky vehicle, Michael and Alex were still strapped into their car seats, their tiny bodies lifeless. The image of those two children underwater became one of the most haunting symbols of the case. Overnight, Susan Smith went from victim to villain. The nation that had cried with her now turned on her with fury. Her trial in 1995 became a spectacle. Prosecutors painted her as selfish and manipulative, a woman willing to sacrifice her children for the chance at romance. They pursued the death penalty, showing the jury gut-wrenching photos of the boys and the submerged car. The defense countered with Susan's tragic past. Her father's suicide when she was only 6, years of depression, a suicide attempt as a teenager, and repeated sexual abuse by her stepfather. They argued she was not a monster, but a deeply broken young woman who snapped under unbearable pressure. The jury deliberated for just 2.5 hours. They found her guilty of 2 counts of murder, but chose to spare her life. Susan Smith was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. For the families of Michael and Alex, it was justice, though not enough to heal the wound. Decades passed, but Susan's name remained etched in American memory as a symbol of betrayal. In November 2024, she became eligible for parole for the first time. The news reignited public outrage. Petitions flooded the parole board demanding she never be released. Child advocates and grieving families argued that someone capable of such an act should never walk free again. As of 2025, Susan Smith remains at Leith Correctional Institution in South Carolina. She is 53 years old, still behind bars, and still a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest threat to a child's life is the person meant to love them most. The legacy of the Susan Smith case stretches far beyond Union, South Carolina. It forced America to confront a horrifying truth, that the danger to a child is not always a stranger lurking in the dark, but sometimes a parent standing in the light of day. When that car was dragged from the lake, it revealed more than 2 bodies. It revealed the face of a mother who traded love for desire, leaving scars no amount of time could ever heal. Susan Smith's tears fooled a nation, and her lies rewrote a nightmare in real time. And she was not the first. A decade earlier, another young mother stood before the public, weaving a story about a mysterious stranger. The world believed her too, until her injured daughter revealed the truth that shattered everything. Subscribe to Dark Side Secrets to watch that case in our next episode, as we continue exposing the stories that hide in the darkest corners of human nature.